welcome to the DePINed podcast. I'm your host, Tom Trowbridge. Thrilled to have you here and thrilled to have Alec Wilson, COO, co-founder of Spexi, a really fascinating project, which is doing basically drone-based mapping. Fabulous. So with that, I want to go dig straight into Alex. Let's talk. Give me some detail. Tell us about Spexi, what you do and how it works.
Cool. Yeah, Tom, thanks so much for having me and Spexi on. So we're building a two-sided platform or network for drone-based imagery. So ultimately, we're obsessed with this problem of why doesn't drone quality imagery exist at scale? Why can't you go and purchase drone quality imagery anywhere on the world like you can satellite and then high resolution fixed wing imagery? Why can't you do that? And there's a bunch of reasons why the drone industry has somewhat stagnated in that effect. And a lot of it has to do with standardization and simplicity. And so our network makes capturing and uploading drone quality imagery to the network very simple from a drone pilot's perspective. It standardizes this entire process. So we use one type of drone and we use one type of imagery collection. And we make that available to customers that want to buy it on the other end through an API and value-added product. So essentially, it's kind of like Uber for drone pilots, but drone pilots, instead of giving people rides, they're flying their drones using our autonomous software, capturing imagery at scale.
Super interesting. So it's drone-based imagery at scale. And for people that don't know, help us understand why drone imagery is superior. Because people see Google Earth, right? They know Google Earth. My hunch is most people aren't familiar with the resolution and the benefits of drone-based imagery.
Yeah, so great question. Drones deliver imagery at a much higher resolution than satellites or planes can provide. So the first thing that we kind of camp on is quality of the imagery. The drones are much closer to Earth, so they're shooting through much less air or atmosphere. So there's very little distortion when it comes to the actual sensing of the Earth from the drones. And because they're so much closer, they are producing resolutions, imagery resolutions that are just unprecedented at any kind of scale. So to give you context, the best satellite imagery you can buy, the best that you can buy commercially, and it's very expensive, the pixel size is about 30 centimeters by 30 centimeters. So that's the resolution of the Earth you're seeing from a satellite. With drone imagery, and specifically with the imagery that we're collecting at scale, we're collecting at 3 centimeter pixels. So just from a resolution perspective, you're 10 times better right from the beginning. And from a detail perspective, you're about 900 times better. So it's just that the quality of the data product, the amount of pixels in that image is just much, much better. The next thing is because we are a decentralized network of people that own these drones, we're able to actually start collecting in areas of high priority much more frequently than can be done by a more centralized satellite constellation, or the next best from satellites is fixed wing aircraft. And so those actually fly over most cities in North America today. When you open up Google Maps, you'll see two types of data. You'll see satellite imagery, and then where it's available, you'll see fixed wing imagery. And so that's planes flying over cities, capturing higher resolution imagery, typically once a year, maybe twice a year, sometimes a little more than that. But it's very expensive. It's very hard to scale, and it emits a lot of carbon. So these things all put together make a really good case for drone imagery because we're much higher resolution. We can update more frequently. We're at a better cost, and we emit far less carbon. And so the data product that we produce is just much more valuable than what exists at scale for these other types of imagery providers. The trick is just how do you do it? How do you do it at scale? And that's why the Spexi network is here.
Super compelling. But to dig into those points, so 30 centimeters from a satellite image to 30 centimeters to 3 centimeters. 30 centimeters would be what, like a large book? And something like that, like
right,
yeah.
For example, a good example that we use all the time is like train tracks, right? In order to actually see the condition of a train track and is it bending, is it moving, are some of the ties coming up, is there pooling water around it, which is a big cause of derailment, things like that. From a satellite imagery, that's just impossible to see. If you zoom into a rail track on Google Earth, you'll just get a pixelated blob. right? You'll have no ability to inspect any kind of real world condition. With our imagery, you can see it from a height, but then you zoom in and you can actually see everything that's regarding that train track. Like, is it moving? Is it out of place? Is there things around? Is there vegetation encroached on it? Is are ties coming up? And you can apply that to many different types of other assets, like buildings, for example, of course. Infrastructure like bridges and roads. These are really important things that we need to inspect often, and it's very hard to do that from legacy data sources.
And when you talk about price competitiveness, you say that was super, that even that 30 centimeter imagery is much more expensive. Give us a sense as to price point differentiation here.
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a few services now that try to aggregate satellite data to provide customers with a better buying option, so that the prices are sort of moving around all the time. But ultimately, you have to buy a certain amount of area, which is the kicker. Like, you have to buy a minimum amount of area, like sometimes a square kilometer, 5 square kilometers, just if you even want to see one piece of like a building or some sort of coordinate. And so this starts to create a price gap that makes tasking these satellites to do this for you very expensive. Also, typically, you have to wait a month at least. So if you want a specific area imaged with this high resolution satellite data at 30 centimeters, typically you get a line of other customers wanting to do that, and it takes about a month to produce the imagery for you. Whereas with our system, we can do it quite quickly, sometimes the same day, depending on if the region's up and running within our network. And we can produce the imagery at the resolution that you need and at a much lower price. So kind of depending on where you look, we can be anywhere from 5 to 10 times cheaper.
That's a material cost savings, which is really compelling. Well, listen, now I think we know what it is. Let's back up and talk about Alec. This is undoubtedly the first time I've been on a podcast or even met someone in crypto who's a helicopter pilot. So that is cool. Tell us, and what I find with so many DePIN projects is people have their experience has actually perfectly suited to this current expression of what they're building. And looking at your background, it looks like you've sort of done everything to get you to be an expert in this, and the technology matured at a level that allowed you to actually position yourself to be right in this area. So is that a fair characterization given some of your background?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes I pinch myself because I get to, I still get to operate, vast amounts of aircraft, but I'm in tech and building software networks. It's so fascinating. So yeah, to back up, I started my career in aviation as a commercial helicopter pilot. I have thousands of hours flying all over Western Canada, fighting fires, flying mining guys around, doing forestry, supporting some of the biggest helicopters in the world, you name it. I've done some very complex execution in the cockpit, getting things done with aircraft. And however, around sort of 2 or 3 years into my career, I started noticing drones coming onto our job sites more, and I got really curious about them. And of course, they were sort of exploding, and you kept hearing about all these drones that people had. This was around 2016. And I had the opportunity to actually start a company that would become Canada's largest drone pilot certification, regulation, technology, and training company. And we were able to help the regulator, Transport Canada, and parts of the FAA come up with the current regulations that exist today to integrate drones into the manned airspace safely and effectively. And so we were able to consult and help shape those regulations based on our experience as pilots, but then also launch a product company that trained pilots at scale to meet those standards. So I got a very good understanding of what makes drone pilots tick and what kind of questions they're asking. And one of the main questions that kept coming up over the tens of thousands of drone pilots we trained was, how do I make more money with this thing? How do I get a side hustle going? I love flying drones. My inner child is a pilot. I never made it to flight school, but this is a really great way for me to do that. How do I make some money with this thing? And that was a question that really sat with me and I wrestled with. And around that time, I met a man named Bill, who's the CEO of Spexi. And basically, we had a very similar vision of what we wanted to do in the drone space, which was make it super simple for drone pilots to contribute to the highest resolution base layer of Earth, because we know the demand for this data is moving more higher resolution than lower resolution. And so essentially, that's how the Spexi network came to be. And my CEO, Bill, who's he has a very deep background in imaging from fixed wing aircraft. So his companies were the companies that sat between the satellite layer and imaged vast amounts of cities with fixed wing aircraft. And we both saw this thing coming. And so that's kind of how my background relates to getting things done at Spexi using drones.
Super interesting. And so, and if you think about Spexi for a second, not only is your background relevant, but the technology has matured to the point where you can have Spexi that couldn't have existed from either a technology or it sounds like even regulation perspective, even as recently as a couple of years ago. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, there's a few things that come together, and it's one of the reasons the Spexi network is. It's certainly a big bite. Like it's a challenge because we have aviation regulations, and of course we have financial and crypto regulations that we put together to build this puppy. But regulations only have really existed since 2019 in Western countries. So to your point, it's very recent that this technology is starting to flourish, but also the supply of capable aircraft, capable drones like this one that we connect to, the DJI Mini series, the sub 250 gram series. They have been so successful in their sales that these drones are everywhere. They're in every city in most countries in the world. And there's tons of them that really don't do much. Pilots, people that buy them, they like to fly them on the weekend and then they kind of run out of things to do with them. And we're giving them another reason to use this thing and actually earn with it. So there's the combination of regulations, but also availability of the technology and the capability of the technology. The sensors that come native in these little drones are incredible. And these aircraft, a feat of engineering. I'm so impressed with these aircraft every time I fly them. And all of these things came together really around 2022 that we felt it was the right time to hit the go button here.
And that's when you founded Spexi about 2 years ago.
No, Spexi's been around for longer than that, and really trying to build the technology up to where we thought it was ready to hit the next button. It's been around since 2018, but we've been building different sort of parts of it to test and battle test with revenue to try to get the platform, the systems ready that we could fly at the kind of scales we're talking about with our code using these systems. So really since 2022, we decided to hit the go button on getting the Spexi network up to this kind of scale and also start to talk about crypto economics. And that's kind of a whole other piece of our journey.
Well, yeah, and that's a great thing to talk about. Let's talk about how you reward pilots. And I guess there's a reward today, and then there's a reward once you launch a token. But how do pilots get rewarded today for participating?
So today we're in our beta testnet phase of this network. So we've just launched a massive program in British Columbia, Canada, as we're capturing most of the urban area in the province of BC in Canada. We're also about to launch 2 cities in the States, Austin and San Francisco. And right now, pilots can earn cash plus reputation points for every hexagon. We call them spexagons. Every spexagon that they successfully capture on our network and upload to the platform with verified imagery. So depending on where these spexagons are and how much how many buildings or population densities within the spexagons, they have differing values, but there's a cash reward right now between roughly $5 and $10 per spexagon. And then they also get what we call reputation points. Reputation points are rewarded to pilots, and they can use them to reserve more areas they want to fly. So the more reputation you have on the network, the more areas you can reserve. But they also tie the user into a future token distribution event. So if and when we launch a token, pending regulatory approval or clarity from our perspective, pilots that have those points will be eligible for a token distribution. And the ratios, again, are all TBD at this point.
Fascinating. So first I love the idea of reputation points allow you to reserve, spexagons. That is great because that also gives you visibility into what's going to be mapped going forward. It gives them comfort and real value in terms of where to go next, how to plan a trip, whatever. And how long does that reservation last, out of curiosity?
Yeah, so they can reserve a spexagon for up to 48 hours. And again, the more points they have, the more they can reserve. And so it unlocks in stages. And if they don't fly the spexagon in 48 hours. They actually get docked reputation points.
They lose. Makes sense.
So and they lose them faster than they can gain them. So as this is in real life,
it's just like real life.
Yeah.
Lifetime to build a reputation, it can be gone like that, right? So it makes sense.
And in the future, in the crypto future, we plan to have that as one of our main token utilities on the network. So you'll be actually able to stake token in order to reserve more areas to fly. So the more you have, the more you can fly. And if you don't act in the best interest of the network, which would be to not do what you're saying or not fly reservations when you've reserved them for yourself, so other pilots can't fly them, then there'll be some kind of penalty for that.
And how long does it take to map a hexagon, a spexagon?
So they are 22 acres in size, each one. And depending on which standardized mission is loaded into the spexagon, so we have a few different types of very standardized missions that get loaded in depending on what the customers are asking for. They can be anywhere from 7 minutes to a minute and a half. So very quick.
Fast.
And it's all autonomous, right? So our app fully takes over the brain of the drone. The pilots...
You just launch it. They just launch it and that's it.
They basically get close to one. They can see it on their app. They navigate to them. They get close to one. They make sure the area is safe to fly. They then hit fly in the mobile app. The drone fully just launches. It goes straight up to about 260 feet above ground. And then it starts flying its autonomous mission. And the pilots are monitoring for safety. So they're really not doing any flying. They're just monitoring for safety.
So they have override capability.
Yeah, in the event they need to, they can immediately take back manual control and the drone returns to flying just as it would out of the box. And there's about 3 ways you can do that. You can pull down on the left stick of the drone, of your controller. You can switch the mode on the controller. You can have the drone return to its home position. It takes a GPS coordinate when it takes off, and it will always come back to that position. It's a great safety feature. And then lastly, you can pause it in the app. So there's a bunch of ways pilots can get control again.
Fascinating. And so then how do you determine which cities to launch, how to prioritize these hexagons? Is that based on customer demand? Is there another metric?
Yeah, I mean, right now, we're really focusing in on the demand side of this network. So all of the capture that's currently on the network right now is under contract. So it's under. We just announced a 7-figure contract for the BC program. This is all with regards to emergency response and preparedness from governments around wildfire. So it's a really great use case for the imagery. As we move into new markets, we are really doing our best to try to lead with demand and have the go-to-market strategy be proven as we grow for these initial phases. So it's not all like that. Like in some of the areas we test because we want to see how the pilots react to that and the data and that kind of thing. But for the most part, we're leading with demand. As we get to more mature stage of the network and we feel like our technology is capable of really much bigger scales, which we're pretty much there now, we're going to start to move faster and start moving ahead of demand as we know the go-to-market strategy works for those areas, but getting the data and then selling is part of the strategy as well.
I think you're not totally unique, but you're on the unique end of DePIN projects in having real customers and actually leading with customer demand. I mean, the typical DePIN project builds up a ton of supply and then looks for demand. And it looks like you guys have been doing this for a while, and you're actually unusually starting with the demand side, which is great to hear, which means you're probably, and you're not paying for the drone flights, right? So that sounds to me like that's a profitable or close to be profitable business from the get-go.
Yeah, our unit economics are profitable as we move into these regions. Like right now, all the unit economics on the platform are very profitable. As we get to bigger scales and want to start really moving faster, as we start to prove out these go-to-market strategies and like really see the fruit on the trees, we'll likely depress those unit economics to move faster and gain more ground quicker, because it's only as good as it is easy to sell, right? Like ultimately, we need to be able to sell at scale, and this kind of data, especially when you get it going off the beginning, it's a B2B sales strategy. You need to have sales team and people in place selling the data, making relationships, and providing access to the systems that make the data available. So we're trying to get it to this point where we can see a clear path to the go-to-market strategy, really working with revenue coming in at scale and then really hitting the go button. So yeah, I mean, ultimately, look, there's many ways to skin a cat here to how to build these networks. You can look at some of the OG two-sided marketplaces like Uber and Airbnb and how they subsidize supply to get into these places. We all know crypto economics plays a really interesting part in bootstrapping the supply side of networks, making your CapEx going out to the supply side less as you can afford to really go faster. But to your point, I think there definitely has been challenges on making sure that you can build demand, at least in some pace of how the supply is growing. And ultimately, there's no free lunch. And at some point, you have to bring these things up together. Otherwise, it'll just fizzle out. So something we've really been focusing in on, and we're excited at the progress we're making so far.
It sounds like you're making terrific progress, but you actually lead to the question of your progress is so good. Do you need decentralization? Is that at all a help? Can't you make this more, to play devil's advocate here? Doesn't this work as a centralized business that just takes a margin from paying people to map things? Like coin is great economics, but if you didn't have the demand, but you already have the demand, is that necessary? How decentralized would you make this? Do you actually lose some BD potential if you make it decentralized?
It's a really good question, and it's one we get asked quite a bit. There is a way to scale this without decentralization, without looking at crypto economics. There is, and it's interesting. However, from our perspective, using crypto economics, using blockchain payment rails, using the ownership economy, using these incentives that are new and exciting and interesting and provide different opportunities for stakeholders on the network is a bigger, more exciting, and more valuable story for everyone involved. And so we think it also moves faster with crypto economics. We think that the ability to bring this into underserved markets using payment rails and crypto economics, like blockchain payment rails and crypto, is super exciting. There's like so much opportunity for this kind of data in rural and like developing countries, because they just don't have any imagery, right? Like all they have is satellite imagery. And at best, they really don't have anything that enables them to make better decisions. This empowers people from the ground. So it empowers locals to contribute to this data set and actually generate the reward back to them that gives their communities this ability to make much smarter decisions about how to manage their resources and infrastructure. And it's super powerful. Like, so for example, in Canada, we have a few of our test cities. The city of Kelowna is a good one in the Okanagan. We flew the city for them for a wildfire use case, and they loved it. And they were like, oh my gosh, okay, we want it across the whole city. We'll pay for it. We're like, great. So we got pilots together and we flew it. And they were like, hang on. So you're getting us a data product that's way better in quality. You can refresh it much faster due to this decentralized network of pilots. We can tell you exactly where we want more freshness than less freshness. And the money we pay you, some of it goes back into the pockets of our community that's flying it. And we were like,
voters.
Yeah. We're like, this is amazing. Right now, all the money we spend on this stuff is going to these centralized satellite or plane companies, and we don't see any of it. And it takes like 6 months to get the data back. And so when you take that concept and you put it into, parts of the world that are developing and are so in need of the data, but also the employment opportunities or the ability to earn, it's a really fascinating concept. And the third kind of piece is drones are exciting. I think people really find them interesting. And for the most part, they're very tech forward. People love to fly them in their spare time. And so there's this interesting sort of intersection of using your spare time and some of your work time to contribute to something like this. So we're really seeing a big product market fit uptake on the pilot side as well. Just like both of these sides, we seem to have struck a chord here.
I imagine something that is a centralized company, you can control to some extent who you sell your data to, where it gets resold, different thing. Decentralized, that may be somewhat of an issue. And if this resolution is 3 centimeters as opposed to 30, there's lots of potentially less positive use cases for that, right? And that's true for everything in crypto. And so that's got to be, I'm sure there are some sensitivities around, locations or sites or, different areas that all manner of actors may have an interest in that they probably shouldn't be able to see that level of access. How do you guys think about those risks?
Yeah, I mean, and you're totally, you're bang on some of that stuff. One thing to keep in mind is the Earth is being imaged constantly as we speak. It's just constantly being imaged at varying resolutions. And some resolutions the public just don't have access to, right? Like the military have some wild resolution satellites that are classified and all of that. So it's not like, it's not like we're reinventing the wheel of imaging. Like this has been happening for a long time. We're just doing it in a different way and at higher resolutions. When we talk about decentralization and how you might control that, it's stuff we're still figuring out. We talk a lot about the minimum viable decentralization path for this network. There needs to be a level of control as we build it out because of what we're doing. We're flying aircraft using code at scale at levels that have never been done before. And we're doing that producing the highest resolution data set that's ever existed on the planet. And so in order to do this the right way, we need to think about it clearly, and we need to come up with ways to decentralize that provide some of the controls that are in the network's best interest, right? If things move too quickly and decentralization happens too fast, and all of a sudden, things are being done at a scale that that might not be, good, like in some of the negative potentials that could exist with imagery of this resolution, that's in no one's best interest. So we talk about decentralization in really what is our minimum viable path to it to get going, and then how does that work as we continue to grow and scale. And to be frank, we're still figuring that out, and we've got some of the best sort of minds and advisors and investors helping us with that to try to really think about, governance and decentralization and what does that really mean for our network. And it's a work in progress, but certainly we feel that it can be done, and that if we can do it at the right way, it makes everything way more valuable.
You mentioned decentralization and the path to it. Returning to the token a little bit, when you think about that, one of the reasons that I sort of think makes sense to have one is if you pay people in cash, that's fine and that's great. But if you pay someone a token and this network scales to the level you seem to think it can, if the token economics are architected appropriately, that token that someone received that was worth X should be worth many, many, many multiples of that X down the road. And so you actually are giving the earlier contributors to the project potentially they are rewarded for being an early contributor to the project when it is most valuable to you, right? As they should be. I like to joke that, the early sellers on Amazon, all they got for that was more competition and lower margins as Amazon grew, right? That's it. They didn't get anything. And yet, if you're an early contributor to pick your DePIN project, you're paid in tokens. If you hold those tokens and the project works, you should do very well. And so that, to me, that's a democratization, if you will, of capitalism to some extent and of participating in these networks. And I think that is a real benefit of doing it. Doesn't necessarily make you more successful or not. It might, but at least it involves a broader community in a super equitable way.
Yeah, I mean, and the ownership economy, there's some great pieces out from Multicoin, from Variant, from A16 on the thesis and the theories around how the ownership economy fueled by crypto and fractional ownership can help to bolster new types of ecosystems, and we love that. We love those kinds of thinking around this, and that's how we think a lot about this. But ultimately, I think people do what they're incentivized to do, and incentives play a big role in human behavior. We're not disillusioned that the activity of flying a drone and capturing imagery on this network is fairly active. It requires very intentional behavior for each one of these things to be flown. It's different than a lot of the DePINs. It's not a plug and play or a plug it in and just let it go. It's really not that, and it won't be like that for a long time. I think there's some versions of this when we get to more sophisticated drone regulations where you can have a drone in a box and it sits on your roof and it just takes off, does its thing, and comes back and lands and recharges. That's actually totally a reasonable future for this It's just very far away from a regulatory perspective on the drone side. In the meantime, for the next at least 5 years, probably 5 to 10, this is an active network. And so we need to make sure that we're keeping, those things totally at the front of mind and respecting the effort that's required to make this work. So developing a crypto economic system that works for folks in the short term and the long term is really the challenge for us as we talk about, getting more decentralized and moving into a token powered economy. And I think that's one of the challenges that a lot of DePINs face, right? It's like, it's great to be told that, this might be worth more in the future and so hold. But if you're doing something that takes time out of your day and that, maybe has an opportunity cost for you, it's a little bit harder of a sell. So again, we're really thinking about this stuff a lot all the time. And it's part of why we have not launched a token yet, and regulatory reasons, but we're still working on the best way to value all stakeholders in this network. Ultimately, we feel really confident because the data product that's being produced by the network is super high value. It's a net new aerial imagery data product. We talked about the resolution, we talked about the frequency. So there's a lot of demand for it. And so that makes the incentives easier to design because we know that we can start to build with this influx of cash coming in to help make this make sense for folks. But we're still working on the design of those things and hopefully going to be publishing more shortly, but still in the design phase.
You mentioned scale at one point. How big? Help people understand how big this imagery market is. Like, I'm guessing most people on this are not imagery market experts or even novices. So give us some scaling, market today, market growth, because what I'm guessing, the market is X, but with a much better product, right? There's, as always the case, there's massive market expansion potential. So can you help us sort of understand those?
Yeah, I mean, the aerial imagery market is huge. It's, tens of billions of dollars today. So you have satellite imagery and you have fixed wing imagery, fixed wing planes flying with pilots, capturing areas. You also have the drone service industry, which is huge today. Drones are used in a variety of different purposes, from government to private sector, mining, forestry, police, first responders. It's all kind of matched in, but being able to actually task and scale drones in a standardized way, that's something that's never been done before. And we believe adding this super high resolution layer of imagery to this already massive drone and aerial imagery business, it gets up to like the $200 billion mark very soon. Like we've got some estimates, aerial imagery plus drone services in this kind of way, like huge. Like if you think about some of the applications on your phone that you would use a lot, so Google Maps is a great one. They consume a lot of aerial imagery just to show you things. And if they had high resolution imagery options, we suspect they would likely use them. But not just to show you things. The navigation relies on imagery from street view and from the air to try to predict what's changing in an environment. The advertising analytics within the Google ecosystem rely on geospatial location information. A lot of it derived from aerial imagery products. The prediction markets of how you actually predict where people are going and what traffic is going to go where in front of stores relies on a lot of aerial imagery. It's a massive component of these new AI systems coming into play. So ChatGPT Vision, for example, they launched, and a crazy computer vision algorithm that's been able to start picking out things within high resolution images to tell you what's going on with them. And they're training this data on ever increasing resolution images. So just the ability for this layer to be trained into these new AI models is really exciting. Metaverse companies, so gaming applications that are obsessed with recreating the physical world in the metaverse, they are super hungry for this data. We're making some really good roads in that space as well with some of the biggest customers in the world that create experiences for people in the metaverse. And they're like, oh my gosh, this kind of imagery, like what you're producing at scale is unheard of. Like this is like our dream. Like the fact that you guys have figured out a way to produce this kind of data at scale, it's like, they're just like, give us as much as you can give us in these cities and that cities and those cities, and so then we start to figure out how best to expand and move quickly with them. But ultimately there's no shortage of demand for a higher resolution aerial view. And that's another thing to touch on. When you move the perspective from the ground to the air, the value increases by 10x. You can see so much more of the physical world and the things happening within it. Street view level phone or car imagery has been around for some time, and there's totally value to it. But when you bring the perspective into the air, everything gets more valuable. There's way more use cases that can be derived per pixel. And so it's part of why we think it hasn't been done, because it is a hard problem to solve. It's hard to be able to scale, little aircraft flying code, while staying within drone regulations and, aviation regulations and all these things that keep people safe. You have to build with those things in mind. So all of that to say, the market is huge, and we're excited to start increasing the size of it with our system.
And so what will be the limit to scale? Is the limit drone pilots? Is it customer need? Is it your software mapping tools? And, where do you, where's the break and the bottleneck in the growth of this?
Yeah, I think we have to be mindful in how we scale, in that it's done correctly. So when I say that, I mean safety is a top priority of the network, so that pilots are, trained in the right way and understand that, that they are flying aircraft, and that if you don't do that right, there can be consequences. Making sure that we're able to operate in regions while continuing to increase demand for it, and bringing these up in somewhat of parallel still requires effort, and it will for some time. But ultimately, we feel that this is going to be the new standard for how drones are flown and how aerial imagery is consumed at this resolution. And so we believe that this will be in every country, and that it will be there because every country wants it, because the imagery enables them to make so much better decisions about everything that exists within their countries. So, ultimately, the infrastructure is there, the technology is there, the hardware is there. There's some geopolitical stuff going on with drones that, that might cause some ripples into the future, but we're very prepared for that. We've got some great advisors on the Capitol Hill talking with some of those firms and informing our position. But, the software exists, the hardware exists. Now it's really just making sure we can get the incentives nailed, and away we go.
And what about competitive landscape? Is the special element here your scale, or is it the mapping, the compliant, scalable mapping algorithm that you guys have built? What makes it your lead durable?
So we certainly have built a technical moat. No one has built a network like this in the drone space. We're certainly the first out there. We have built, I think, an operating moat in just the amount of folks that we've assembled that have these really interesting parts of this sector covered, to have the knowledge to do this the right way. And so far, even just what we've launched in our testnet in BC, which is 95% of the urban area, it's about 660,000 acres of area that we're going to image with drones. We've already imaged 3/4 of that in a month. This is by far the largest drone data capture program attempted in that kind of timescale, like by a large margin. We're now starting to build a data moat as well. And so getting out there in front of folks that may want to do this in front of us in terms of data, and getting that over these regions, and then being able to sell it quickly because of our go-to-market strategy has been fleshed out. We feel that provides quite a significant competitive advantage. And then lastly, crypto economics and incentives around crypto economics are complex, and they're hard to get right. And there's lots of things that need to be thought about correctly in order to do it the right way. And of course, as you know, once you do it, you can't walk it back. It's really hard to change things. And so we believe that we're quite far down that road. We've spent quite a bit of time with really, really bright minds on our team and advisors designing this incentive system in the background. And we believe that once we're ready to announce it, that it's also going to provide more of a technical moat. So all that to say, in the drone space, we're the only ones doing this. We expect there'll be copycats sooner or later. And so it's up to us to move as quickly as we can.
Fascinating. any other projects in the depin space that you pay attention to, either from a crypto economics perspective, from a hardware perspective, from a scale perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we watch a lot of them. We're really big fans of Render. We think that especially their updated incentive design in crypto economics is really smart, and it feels future proofed in how they're managing burn and sort of reallocating crypto back into the system when it makes sense. We're big fans of what HiveMapper is doing. They are an incredibly run project. I think their team has executed really well. They build their own hardware. I mean, it's fascinating, and we certainly think that what they're doing is great for the space. The team at Demo, we've spoken with them quite a bit. We think the way that they approach decentralization and how to grow a network using their hardware is really fascinating. The Weather XM guys are great. I wish them the best, and I hope that they continue to push forward. And also Protocol Labs and Filecoin, we're really close with those guys as well. We think what they've built is incredible and continue to do so. There's a few more out there. There's an interesting one called GeoNet, which has kind of gotten some attention, and they produce data that we could perhaps use in the future to anchor some of our imagery to the ground to provide georeference locations. But certainly the ones that are closest to us would be HiveMapper, really. And the last one is Natix or Natix. I don't know exactly how you pronounce that. They're also our lead investors blockchain, and they're a portfolio company in blockchain as well. And we think what they're doing with computer vision and AI on the device and the imagery as they capture is really cool. And we'd love to actually speak with them at some point further to sort of perhaps do some collaborations on our data. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I think the builders in this ecosystem, this depin ecosystem, are really courageous, and they're super talented. And we have a lot of respect for everyone that's really pushing this thing forward in light of the insane headwinds that are coming out of the United States regulatory environment right now. We're here to support and do what we can, but also push our project as far as we can as well.
Super interesting. Those are all, solid projects, and some have already been on this, some will be on it soon. So know them all. They're terrific. Except you forgot obviously the right answer, which is Fluence Labs, decentralized compute platform. Yeah, how could that? We got to redo the whole podcast now.
Yeah.
But I will say one thing, as you consider token economics, what we do is we reward influence token and stake influence token, but both are reset to a USD value every epoch. And that is important because it protects you on two things. One, a token decline, which disincents participation or disincents use or whatever, and a token moon, where people may just do stuff that's not even necessarily economic because it's so useful. It's a little bit less relevant for your project because you're not going to map something that's not been mapped before, right? Or that there's no incentive to map. So you guys may have a not as worried about the moon, but if it does, you still would rather not. We think we want people doing this for the utility perspective on it, and we want them to participate in the future. But if there's some event and it goes up 10x, it doesn't make sense that the rewards are up 10x. We want people who are counting on that to happen. And so we recalibrate it every epoch, both the reward and the stake. So both sides of the equation, in order to kind of drive that type of user profile. So just sort of mention that because I think it's kind of a relevant component that I haven't seen too many projects implement.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and super fascinating on how you guys are doing that. We think a lot about, a potential USD equivalent to like a reward as it comes online in the network. Ultimately, we think it's important that there's predictability on rewards for drone pilots in our network because of the active nature of what they're doing. And so in order to get them to fly and capture when the customer really needs it, which might be really quickly, we want to make sure that those incentives are aligned so that they'll actually do it. And also, to your point, if and when, prices increase, we also don't want to misalign incentives that all of a sudden, people are doing 7 minutes of flying and they're making an insane amount of USD equivalent.
Right.
It's not sustainable. It's not a healthy design in an incentive system. Like, you want to try to keep things predictable, and so that you build a long-term network that makes sense, not these like highs and lows of feast and famine, because that doesn't work for your customers. Your customers want
correct. And this leads to the Hive Mapper issue. I don't know if you saw they released recently, but the token price moved up so much that people were just driving to map. And it actually doesn't work for them, because you end up these roads getting mapped once that aren't going to be mapped again. And so for you guys, I think about your comment earlier, one of the benefits was you rewarding the local community pilots. And if the token moons, you may just have people who travel to do it. And so you end up rewarding people not in the community, because you got these professional mappers that just run around doing it. And that kind of it still works for you for one cent, right? But it just removes a little bit of value for at least the ecosystem you were talking about.
Yeah. And I did see that happen with Hive Mapper. I mean, ultimately, I think like people are going to do, like, people are driven by incentives. Like, this is human nature. We do what we're incentivized to do. We work because there's value in it. We get money, it provides purpose. But like, ultimately, when you're asking folks to go out and contribute to a network, I think it's important to be mindful of like their perspective and position. And although perhaps, you do your best to design things in a certain way, ultimately, I feel like sometimes it's a bit counterintuitive, and there's a little bit of like back and forth as to, how users behave versus how it's been designed to happen. Like in that Hive Mapper example, like some people just want to go drive and earn and be active, and they also incentivize bursts and they try to get them to move places. So to me, there's the little bit of a, okay, well, there is still an active component to this network, and it's in the network's best interest. So why wouldn't that be still something that you would, at least be open to in the network? But all that to say, to your point, incentives are really important, and the way that they're designed and the mooning of that, we want to try to build a long-term sustainable business here while leveraging the best parts of what the blockchain and the technology can do for the business, and crypto economics is a super interesting way to incentivize participation. So it's something that we're just continuing to push and work on, because we know once you do it, it's really hard to walk it back. And so we want to try to get as much information as we can about both sides of Spexi's network, so that we can create something that's long-term.
Fabulous. Crypto economics, we have to ask the Bitcoin question, since that is a bellwether for our industry. Any predictions or thoughts as to where Bitcoin will be end of the year?
I think Bitcoin will be over 100 US by the end of the year. Personally, I think that there's so much pent up demand still. I mean, I had a good friend of mine who's been super anti-crypto for, years and years. He just bought a bunch of Bitcoin ETF, and he texted me, and I was like, well, everyone better start selling, because that's a top signal.
Top signal right there.
But I mean, it also goes to show, like, there's just, I think, the token economics of Bitcoin, and just the way that it's been designed, and the true decentralized nature of it, and the passive it being, SEC stamp of approval. And all these really interesting payment rails that are coming out of it, and some of PayPal's announcements and things like that. I think ultimately Bitcoin is going to be a large store of value, and that it's only going to continue to increase over time. But by the end of the year, I personally think you'll see over 100K. What do you think?
I'm right there with you. I think, and the thing is, I think that it has this potential to gap up. And we saw recently that the state of Wisconsin Investment Board bought some, and someone made the comment to me, "Oh, state pensions in the U.S. are not necessarily the smartest money." I'm like, yes, but here they actually can create their own destiny in return. Enough state pensions buy it, and it goes up. Like, there's no extra supply coming, and so once that kicks in, I think you could see real convexity. And I just don't know when that happens, but if it gets to 100. It's getting to multi-hundreds. And that doesn't happen immediately, but price will lead price. I'm convinced of it, right? So if it gets to 100, it's going more. And I'm convinced with you, it's getting to 100 by the end of the year. And I think higher as well.
Yeah. I mean, I'm bullish, big bullish on crypto and Bitcoin and, and ETH and I mean, Solana is doing really well. And I'm curious to some of these other ETH L2s and what will play out, but also big bullish on Render. I think what they're doing is really great. And some of the other ones, but in any case, great. I'm excited.
Listen, appreciate it. How do people follow you, follow Spexi? How do they get involved in mapping if they want to map? Like there'll be some people in Austin who want to do this. So let people know how to do it.
So first thing is spexi.com, spexi.com. You can join the waitlist there. Discord is where all of our pilots are funneled into right now. We use Discord as our main onboarding tool, which is not the best tool for onboarding, but it's good for right now for us. So if you're really interested as a drone pilot and you want to contribute, head into Discord. You'll have all the information you need in our Spexi Discord. And then on Twitter, we're Spexi Network, and we post, and on LinkedIn, we're Spexi Network, and we post all the updates there. If you ever want to get involved, all the information is there to do so.
Fabulous. Well, awesome, Alec. Thank you for joining. Look forward to having you back once you've launched the token, made all those decisions, and have a couple U.S. geographies under the belt and see how it's all rolling out. But thank you for joining. It's fascinating to hear about it. Appreciate it.
Tom, thanks so much for having me, and look forward to the next one.
Great.